Welcome to the Vets Connect podcast with your host, Scott McLean.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Scott McLean. My guest this week is Lisa Browne-Banic. Now, Lisa wears a lot of hats, and a number of those hats are in the veteran space. And one hat in particular is women veterans. And about 8 months ago, that's when I first met her, and we had a conversation. It was a brief conversation. The information she was giving me and her passion for women veterans just really stuck with me. And so I finally got to get her on. And with that, let me bring her on. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Like I said, it was a short conversation. And I mean it when I say when we were talking, I'm listening to you and I had zero idea of this. And I served for 10 years. Okay. And since that conversation, and I'm not making this up, since that conversation, I really started to take a little stock in my time in the military and all the active duty women that I worked with. And I was in security police. I was canine. And hey, listen, I looked at them just like you look at anybody else. She's right next to me. She's got a gun. I have a gun. She has a dog. I have a dog. And I never really, and I don't know how many do, take a step back and say, this is a woman, right? One girl in particular stands out. So I was a canine handler, security police, and I was stationed in Northern California. And this young girl came in, and she's a dog handler. And there's not many female dog handlers in the military. And she was really, really doing her best to fit in, and almost too much to try to fit in, to the point where I think at one point she was chewing tobacco and just kind of being one of the guys. And I was a little older. It was my second base. And one night we were working together and I pulled her aside and I said, listen, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. I recommend you just be yourself. Don't let these other airmen influence you. Don't feel like you have to impress them. And I had that conversation with her. It didn't work. Didn't work because, well, peer pressure rules all in those situations. So I never forgot that. But then when I get out, I never really thought that their struggle is different than mine until I met you.
Oh, my.
I'm serious. I never really took stock in what they go through. You know, there's this little tick in the back of my head saying, you got to try, maybe you might want to start trying to help women veterans. And enough about me. So, Lisa, tell us a little about you.
Well, I'm one of, similar to many veterans, both men and women, I wanted to see the world, get away from my family, love my family, but I was the big sister from a big family, so I wanted to unhinge that responsibility and go explore and see what my God-given skills and interests were and worry about the finance of it. So I actually went through ROTC scholarship and then entered the military on the reserve side. And by the way, for all of those reservists and weekend warriors that are out there, we all needed to know in 36 and a half days or so what active duty full-timers needed to know 365 days a year. So kudos to us. So I qualified for Army intelligence, but there was such a waiting list at the time that I was entering that I didn't want to wait any longer. So I took my second qualification, which was Signal Corps. And that was really awesome. And now I'm outdating myself because everything I learned is not used today. Everything is so much more advanced. It's all the technology and communication devices. And in fact, I worked with teams. This was over in Washington State National Guard. I actually had a lot of Microsoft men, because they were all men at the time, actually. I was their leader, and I had a team of Microsoft employees for the most part. Some of them were not, but they were brilliant. And it was my responsibility as their team leader to make sure they had the resources they needed to, what we said was set up AT&T in the middle of nowhere. Now, interestingly, we also worked satellite communications, and anything above the atmosphere is no longer in the Army or in the Air Force for that matter. It's in Space Force,
Yep.
which is a real thing, right? So I'm really dating myself because we did work satellite communications and set up phone communications in the middle of nowhere. And it was real fun as the team leader to be the timer, ready, set, go, and see how fast they could set it up, or lift and shift, as we say, to pretend like we needed to get out of a combat area and relocate all the communications stuff. So during that time, I actually had studied journalism in college and was working in various capacities because I was in the reserves and in the National Guard. I had a full-time job doing advertising, marketing, and whatnot. That as the years went by, I thought, why don't I get that same skill set qualified in the military, because I'm already doing it on the outside. So I became a public affairs officer, and my last assignment was actually a 5-year active duty full-time assignment in United States Southern Command in West Miami. And I worked as a public affairs officer under now retired Marine General John Kelly. And that was a fascinating experience. It was my first real experience working joint operations because we had everybody. It was a command center with a 5-star general officer. We had everybody there: Navy, Army, Air Force, CIA, FBI, USAID, and so on and so forth. So that was really great. So then that ended my military career, and just through some of the contacts I had over the years, I was asked to teach as an adjunct professor, and I received a lot of great feedback and encouragement. And so I asked to teach more than just the one class a semester. And the dean of the college said, well, that's nice, we like you too, but you're not really allowed to teach anymore. And I said, why not? Because you need a graduate degree. So that's where I am now. I'm starting my dissertation for my PhD so that I could teach and research full-time. And unbeknownst to me at the time, when I was invited to teach part-time, I was already doing unofficial research because I realized I'm nothing without my team. I grew up in a big family. They were my team. I was in the Army Reserves, National Guard. They were my team. And now my family, my siblings have their own families. I'm the renegade. I'm all the way on the other side of the country from them. I just felt like I didn't have a team anymore. So I actually did the opposite of what you said. I went exploring who's working with veterans, who's working with military, who's out there.
Yeah.
And I just started discovering all kinds of great organizations that were making efforts to socially, emotionally, physically be there for veterans. And I joined them. I joined on the national level, the Service Women's Action Network, which acronym is SWAN. And a lot of people don't know this, but today, now, every U.S. government building, including the embassies around the world, in addition to having to have a women's restroom, they need to have a nursing room. And I remember sitting on the toilet trying to feed my baby girl when I was on duty. And you men, you don't have to think about that.
No.
You'll never experience it.
No.
And thanks to SWAN, who's a huge lobbying research entity, Service Women's Action Network, they have been very involved in passing legislation like that. They also passed legislation so there was equity of the spouses who were men to women veterans, that they were receiving the benefits across the board, so that it was equitable, whether or not you were a woman veteran or a man veteran, that your spouse was getting the benefits due to them. And they're still involved in a lot of research and legislation at the national level. At the state level, through a lot of these contacts I made in veteran organizations and speaking engagements that I've been invited to, involved with, I was invited last year to be on the Women's Advisory Board for the state of Florida's veteran, the FDVA, the Florida Department of Veteran Affairs, FDVA. So we meet quarterly, and our purpose is to permeate all of the state of Florida, make sure, number one, women veterans know that they're veterans, because studies have shown that many of us, and I was one of them when I was done with my duty in 2016. I didn't know that I was a veteran because I was never in a combat zone. So I thought, well, I'm not a veteran, therefore I don't have those benefits, and I'm not even going to bother because I don't qualify. And come to find out, of course you qualify if you've served in uniform, if you've worn the uniform for a minimal amount of time. Because the truth of the matter, going back to my little mantra, I am nothing without my team, is if we don't work as a team, men and women, in whatever our roles or ranks or responsibilities, the mission doesn't get done. So it's not just who's in the combat zone, but who supports that combat zone. Everybody's a team, and in order to be successful in whatever mission we're working on in or outside of the combat zone, we have to work together, and we're all veterans, having served them, having worn the uniform. I'm trying to emphasize that,
Yes.
because in our studies, we also have found that when we do a survey, have you served, there's a tendency to say no, but if we word it, have you worn the United States Armed Forces uniform? And then the second question, well, from what time to what time? And then you qualify as a veteran. So
Well,
yes.
that's an interesting point. And I've heard that. And I've only heard that recently. I've heard that type of thought process.
Mm-hmm.
But they're a cog in the machine.
Absolutely.
They are part of the machine.
Mm-hmm.
You need people like that to make my job as a security policeman or whatever functional and work. And I break it down to the basics. If you raised your hand and you took an oath and you wore a uniform, then you served. But that's interesting with that. Well, I wasn't in battle, so I didn't really serve. That's an interesting thought process that, again, this is starting to come up a lot in conversations I'm having with other veterans and things that people don't even think about.
Right.
You know, if they told somebody on the street, yeah, I was in the Air Force. Well, we assume that you served, like you served, but they don't.
And I'll even go a step further, Scott.
Yes.
Some people, you were in the Air Force? Oh, what did you fly? You know what? That's a very, very small percentage of the Air Force. Everybody's important. Everybody's important.
Yes.
And I think the biggest problem is when a person says, well, I do this, and they puff up with pride. Well, you couldn't do it without the team.
That's right.
So one of the things that I say is it doesn't matter man or woman, support role or combat role, pilot or engineer, cook or lawyer. We all have to work together, and we all matter. And I think the problem really comes down to the root of when somebody has attitude.
Yeah.
Now, the attitude happens to affect women more because women are the smallest number around and usually the only. And by the way, I do need to say, you mentioned she's a girl.
I know.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
You mentioned
she was a girl at the time. She was like 18.
No, she's a
woman. And I look
at
her now. Looking back, okay, I'm an older man. I am not going to, you win. You win. I am not going to justify or try to justify.
I'm being playful with you, but the reason why we're talking is for the awareness. And I think things just happen and people forget. When you say man and the next sentence you say girl, you're already putting us less than.
That's 100% correct. And we had a little discussion before we came on about Women's Veterans Day, female. And I said, I don't want to mess that up. And then I go and say that. But you're right. And I thank you for that. I thank you for that. So, I will carry that with me like I carry the other stuff you said with me.
Well, and you've heard me say this, and we all need to respect one another as teammates, as coworkers.
When did you really start jumping full boat into your advocacy for women veterans? Did you go from, this place to this place and you learn and you see, because you're a learner. You're one of those people you just like to learn.
Yes. Lifelong learning. That's definitely.
Yes. And I don't think you're done. I don't think you're a PhD candidate. I mean, you're not done. And that rigor is something else. We'll talk another time about that.
When did I start being an advocate? From the moment I got in ROTC. I didn't realize it at the time, but I did. I remember we would go 2 mornings a week on for our rock or our run. And I felt like I had to prove myself. And I know your story earlier was you don't have to do that. Well, guess what? From a woman's point of view, yeah, you do.
And that's why it didn't work. That's why I said it didn't. She kept.
You do. Because if you don't, you don't get recognized. You don't get credit.
Respect.
There was a male, they call him a training officer. And I remember that I was giving my team credit, which is the right thing to do, for some project we did in training in the reserves. And he pulled me to the side and he said, "That's great you give your team credit, but you have to remind people that you led them." And I didn't do that. It was hard for me to do that. And maybe that's just my personality. I'm not going to say all women are like that. I'm just going to say I think that was my personality. But it was good of him to teach me how to give myself credit and to ensure that I am getting credit. It's hard to say, what's going on here? It's because it was my idea, because that opens you up for critique and whatnot. So I feel I can empathize with that other woman who didn't take your advice when you said you have to do that, because frankly, you don't know. I will say that this is going to be hard to admit, that over the years, because I spent almost 20 years in the military, that many, many times I was the only woman, or I was just one of two. But when we were doing physical things, I was really in good shape. I was quite the sports person. And I found that in having that experience of, if I didn't outdo, then I wasn't good enough. And I have to say 99% of us women deal with that, especially in this kind of industry. But what happened was I overdid it. Now, when I was in, the equipment didn't fit me right because it was made for men's bodies. We have different framework. I really injured my back. So I've had back surgery because of the wear and tear and the maladjustment of the equipment that I would carry around, even just going on weekly ruck marches. Thankfully, equipment now is being designed for our frames so that we don't injure ourselves over the years and have somebody end up like me. And I'm thankful that it's not any worse than it is. So these are things that would not be obvious to somebody like you because the equipment fit you. Well, and then you want to talk about the women who were the minorities of the minorities. You probably heard of the Army's 6th AAA Central Postal Battalion. They were back in the 1940s. And there was a movie about them recently, all Black women. And they were assigned to England during World War II. And their mission was to clear years of backlog mail in the European theater. They worked in, dark, rat-infested hangars with broken windows. And I mean, it was an awful place to work. But what they did was they improved the morale. And it was mostly men who were on the front lines, right?
Yes.
They improved the morale because they were able to connect people with the communication from their loved ones. Now, what does that have to do with combat? Frankly, it has everything to do with it. Because if you cannot stay connected with your purpose and the people you love, I mean, that's why fast forward today, we have a lot of suicide issues. So I bring that up because I think everybody needs to be reminded, from a woman's point of view, we need to be reminded that we are part of the team and we matter, and we're not better or worse than somebody who's in combat or who's on another part of the team with a different rank or a different role or responsibility. We matter. We're all part of a team. And I think the gentlemen need to remember that we are part of a team. And in order to truly be successful in our missions, we all have to work together and we have to respect our differences, whether it's a role or rank or responsibility or race. We all contribute in different ways, and that's the only way that we're going to win.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned something, is the percentage of women veteran suicide, is that high? Is it going up? Do you know?
Recent studies just in the last couple of years have shown that the suicide rates of women veterans is increasing faster than the suicide rates of male veterans. Now, it's not the sheer volume and number, because women are a very small number of the entire population of veterans and military. However, the ratio of women veterans' suicide rates is growing faster than male suicide rates.
Suicide. So I have a stat here. Female veterans are 250% more likely to die by suicide than civilian women.
Yeah,
So
that's pretty grim.
That's a large number.
Now, it's an issue, and I always like to do this. It's an issue for all men and women.
All men and women. Suicide, veteran suicide is.
Yes, it shouldn't even be. There's 22 a day, but it's actually 44 a day, because the 22 a day does not include suicide instigated by alcoholism, drug use, negative factors that are part of reality. The 22 a day are the raw numbers of somebody actually physically maiming themselves, killing themselves.
Yeah.
The 44 a day encompass the bigger picture of, somebody who became an addict, or was careless, or what have you, because of the suicide ideations that are happening.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Homelessness. I think when we talked, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you said to me, and I think this is the stat that, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, that you said the largest growing demographic of homelessness in the United States is female veterans.
Yes. And that's according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in 2020.
Now, I know some of the reasons.
Let me just throw one more number out.
Hey, listen, it's all you. Yes.
So from 2020 to 2023, the total number of homelessness among veterans, overall veterans, decreased between 2020 and 2023 by 4.5%. However, in that same time period, the homelessness among women veterans increased by almost 24%. So even though veterans at large, the homelessness issue decreased by 4.5% in the 3 years, 2020 and 2023, in those same 3 years, homelessness among women veterans increased by almost 24%. And here's the factors that contribute to that. Trauma. There's a connection, studies have shown, between women veteran homelessness and trauma. Military sexual assault. They had that experience, and they say it's 4 out of 5. I would beg to differ that it's more. Because many of us don't report it. I never reported it. Intimate partner violence, poverty, and single parenthood.
It says housing is a large expense for anyone, but studies show that women are more likely than men to be at risk of poverty. That's an unbelievable stat. I don't know what the details are that go into that, but that's this is some heavy stuff.
Where we live here in Florida, this is a very expensive place to live. And I'm not going to use anybody's name, but I talked to my social worker at the VA, because I'm basically a poor college student working on my PhD. And if it wasn't for my landlord, out of the graciousness of their heart, they're giving me a deal for my daughter and me. I'm a single mother. So my social worker at the VA said, if you didn't have this opportunity and these kind people, my landlords, the advisement he was going to give me is move out of the county. The county is just way too expensive. You're just digging a hole. You're just getting yourself deeper and deeper into debt. And I asked him, is that what you're telling veterans who can't afford their bills, even with the benefits of the mortgage loan and the other benefits that many veterans are entitled to? It's very expensive. And this is not the only county or region that is very expensive. I was talking with another veteran who is a realtor, and he and I are trying to put together some lobbying information for the state of Florida to figure out, people come and pay cash for homes. I'm not talking ritzy either. I just mean many of us veterans don't have an opportunity to even use the VA loan or figure out a payment plan because somebody slaps cash down, and we can't afford to do that. We can't afford to live here. And again, I'm not talking about a ritzy neighborhood. I just mean,
Yeah.
even lower middle class. That all contributes to the homelessness issue. And I want to segue because there was a study done by Wounded Warrior Project in 2021 on how to help women veterans transition, mentoring and networking, peer support, childcare. Like I told you, I sat on a toilet breastfeeding my daughter, and you can't walk into an interview. Although now some people are like, oh, just have the baby play on the floor. And so Wounded Warrior Project 2021 report had these foundings that what women veterans need the most help with as they transition into the civilian world is mentoring and networking, which I provide both professionally and just personally to colleagues and friends. Peer support, childcare, an environment that is safe and not re-traumatizing, access to resources, and then teaching. It says resilience, and what I think it means is we learn resilience in the military. We have to learn resilience under a different kind of way in the civilian world. So those are the things that the 2021 Wounded Warrior Project. And I hope a lot of men who are listening, again, we men and women are not going to succeed unless we help each other. So read that report.
That's an order. That's an order.
That's right. Or at least look at the executive summary in the beginning. Just like my buddy here, Scott, you said, wow, I opened your eyes in some ways. Well, we need to open each other's eyes because there's no way you're going to understand what I've been through because I went through it. And there's no way I'm going to understand what you went through because you went through it. So we need to just listen to each other. And that goes to my point about how do we stop the suicides? We need to work more as a team. We need to talk to each other and listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that needs to happen all the time, because by the time somebody is showing signs of suicide ideation, where were we when it was their birthday? Or where were we when they needed help moving? Where were we when they were getting homeless? I mean, my landlord was here, thankfully. I'm not saying that I was contemplating suicide, but who knows what would have happened to me if I didn't have this angel assist me in my difficult time. We have to be there for each other as friends, as colleagues, as teammates. Can I mention some of the nonprofits people may not know about? So Service Women's Action Network, that's at a national legislative, bare knuckles research, getting laws passed to help women veterans in particular, but then that helps men veterans because we have to be a team capable of working together. And if you can't give women what they need, then we can't be an optimal team member, right? Locally in Florida, there's the Gray Team, and their mission is to provide non-pharmaceutical treatments because another factor of suicide ideation is the side effects of all of these drugs and stuff. Gray Team, Grey Team. Irreverent Warriors. I was turned off by the name Irreverent, and then somebody invited me and said, oh, come on, it's just fun. It's just fun, and it's only veterans. Some of these veteran organizations, they want the families involved, but this is just us. And I tell you what, that was some of the most healing moments for me, just to sit and listen and chat and reminisce, and because we get each other. I mean, maybe we need to listen more to understand the male-female thing, but we get each other. We know what it's like to go to the chow hall during boot camp when you had 2.5 seconds to eat something, and then you inhaled it literally, and then you threw it up because you were running right after. We get that.
The memories.
So, Irreverent Warriors, and their mission is just to have social engagements, primarily through hikes. And then American Legion's on this full-on campaign because American Legion's been around, since the beginning of time, and they're really hoping to get younger people. And I don't know if you've seen their ad campaigns. Hilarious. They're hilarious. So kudos to American Legion. And they're involved at every local level as well as national, passing laws that we don't realize, the fact that the disability pay gets increased, cost of living. And so they're very
The veteran
involved
service
in making
officers are always top notch.
Yeah, American Legion. And then likewise, disabled American veterans, DAV, they're also they're focused on those of us who have disabilities and making sure they were very instrumental, the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, they were very instrumental nationally and in state levels of making sure we had community care options. So we didn't have to wait 30, 60, 120 days to see our specialist. And in the meantime, we were deteriorating and some of us even died. And I wish I had the numbers on that, but it's just disgusting. So yeah, the community care option for veterans. But remember, if you've worn the uniform, you have to have a minimum amount of time, and I don't want to misquote it. But if you've worn the uniform, men and women out there, or whatever you identify yourself, go to your nearest American Legion or veteran of VFW and say, how do I get my benefits? And somebody there, it's usually a VSO, a veteran service officer, will help you. Because it's a lot of paperwork.
Yes. We have a Women's Veterans Day coming up next month, I believe, right? In June,
yes.
June. So 2 months, couple months away. You gave me a little history on that before we came on. So please, Lisa, share that this is amazing information that I don't think anybody knows this. You're the only person in the world right now that knows this. So tell us, please.
I want to rename it Women Finally Get Paid for Survey Day.
and tell the people
because
why.
That's what it is, everybody. Please listen up. It's officially called Women Veterans Day, but it's not to negate our brothers at all. It's June 12th, and it's simply to commemorate the day in 1948, June 12th, that President Harry Truman signed the bill to get paid in the military, in the U.S. Armed Forces. Because before that, guess what, guys? We never got paid a penny.
Volunteer army.
We were given room and board. But we were not given a paycheck until June 12th, 1948, by President Harry Truman.
That definitely needs to be recognized. Well, Lisa, I have, and I say this to all my guests because when I have them on, I always learn more than I knew coming in. And that's a beautiful thing for me. But I do have a funny feeling you will be on again. We'll have more to talk about. I have no doubt about that. I have a feeling that I say this to everybody because it's just amazing what I'm learning about nonprofits and what they offer veterans. And I'll be talking to people from the VA also.
That's right.
Well, Lisa, again, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm really honored, and it was a real pleasure to meet you and to finally get on. And thank you for pestering me because I appreciate it.
Well, at the Herd Foundation, we call it applying pressure. We apply pressure, and it usually works if you apply it the right way and gently, and like with the horses, move the horses, you apply pressure. I'm just going to put you back in the green room. We can talk for a minute as I do my outro. So I will see you in a minute. And again, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you very much.
All right. You're welcome.
Well, there you have it. I want to thank you for listening. If you're getting this on YouTube, thank you for watching. Subscribe. Hit that bell. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, let me know what you like, what you didn't like. And if you want to get in touch with the podcast, if you want to come on the podcast, you can email me at vetsconnectpodcast@gmail.com. And so there you have it. We built another bridge today, and I'll be back next Monday to build another one. Until then, you'll hear me on Monday.
The Vets Connect podcast is produced by Scott McLean at the KOFB studio in Boca Raton, Florida. If you would like to contact us, you can email us at vetsconnectpodcast@gmail.com.